Welcome to the Mutual UFO Network, Los Angeles. I'm Jolene Ray Harrington, Secretary and Director of Public Relations. It's March 19th, 2003. One question we seem to be confronted with on a daily basis is, what is the truth? Does Iraq really have weapons of mass destruction? Why did the space shuttle explode? Do cell phones really cause brain damage? Are flying saucers real? The answer to questions like these usually depends on who you ask. When we look for truth in history, most of us rely on traditional academic sources, textbooks, college professors, or the testimony of the giants in the field. But what if the truth is not actually presented in any of these forums? What if an academic knowledge filter is at work, preventing the dissemination of certain facts and inexorably shaping our understanding of who we are and where we came from? This is the concept that drove tonight's guests to venture beyond the mainstream scholarly structure and dedicate years of research to find out what is the truth, archaeologically, anthropologically, and spiritually, about human origins. Together with his co-author Richard Thompson, Michael Cremo compiled Forbidden Archeology, which remains today a benchmark for alternative prehistory. This exhaustive, expertly documented study brings to light findings that fall outside of the accepted paradigm and were therefore either automatically discredited or completely ignored. Enhancing Michael's fieldwork is his study of ancient Vedic traditions which speak of human beings' existence thousands and thousands of years before traditional anthropologists believe is possible. Since his first explosive book revealed archaeology's dirty secrets, Michael has traveled the world courageously spreading ideas and facts that standard historians have tried to suppress. Despite his controversial beliefs, Michael's scientific and philosophic contributions have earned him membership in a variety of esteemed organizations, including the World Archaeological Congress and the European Association of Archaeologists. If one wants to know the truth, then one needs to examine all the evidence at hand. And we are grateful that Michael Cremo has wrested much of that evidence from obscurity. And now for a personal viewpoint on Michael Cremo, I'd like to introduce our esteemed speaker coordinator, who's responsible for bringing people like him to us, Sandra Marsh. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolene. Well, I guess that's about as high as it goes. I'll try to make this brief so that we can get going. I know the person you really came to hear is Michael. I like to know Michael better than I do, but he's an extremely busy man, busy seeking out the truth. I've always found Michael to be quiet, very gracious man, and unassuming, yet he has a very fierce, keen intellect. I first came across his work about 8-9 years ago through my own investigations into human origins. I'd like to briefly discuss Michael's first two books, Forbidden Archeology, which he co-wrote with Richard Thompson. I'm hoping to bring in Richard Thompson next year for you. And the second book he wrote was Forbidden Archaeology's Impact. The main text of Forbidden Archaeology is solely dedicated to the documentation and analysis of hard scientific evidence consistent with Vedic accounts of extreme human antiquity. The book contradicts the prevailing theory that we, modern anatomical humans, have been around only for about 100,000 years. And it does so by documenting hundreds of anomalies in the archaeological record. Michael's second book, Forbidden Archaeology's Impact. Both these books are quite a read. Whoops, someone's water, excuse me. Michael's first book is this thick. There is a abridged version called The Hidden History of Man, which is about this thick, but if I recall correctly, Michael told me this is only 1/10 of the evidence that they found. And the book has over, it's 1,000 pages. This is Forbidden Archaeology's Impact. Also an excellent read if you're really interested in what's going on behind the scenes and what people like Michael Cremo and Richard Thompson have to go through to bring the truth to you. Forbidden Archaeology's Impact offers an inside look at how mainstream science reacts to any challenge to its deeply held beliefs. Forbidden Archaeology's Impact outlines all the intimidation, the ridicule, and the threats from the scientific community regarding the evidence for extreme human antiquity. I'd like to mention 2 videos. They're called The Mysterious Origins of Man, and if you did not see this series when it was on TV, I strongly urge you to buy copies, get a hold of these any way that you can. You probably will not see them on TV again. The Mysterious Origins of Man, it's a mind-blowing experience, and it's hosted by Charlton Heston. And I'm hoping that Michael might briefly discuss the intimidation and threat campaign that ensued when scientists heard that The Mysterious Origins of Man was in production. Graham Hancock, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Graham Hancock. He's written books like Fingerprints of the Gods and Mystery of the Sphinx. And if you don't know about him, you need to find out about him. Set of Michael's books, one of the landmark intellectual achievements of the late 20th century, and I absolutely have to concur. It is my privilege to introduce you to Michael Cremo, and please give him a warm welcome. You're welcome. These are heavy.
Can I get this off? Okay. All right. Yes, the Forbidden Archaeology is very heavy. One reviewer told me, quite honestly, I couldn't put it down rather than I couldn't pick it up. So it's good exercise. Tonight, I'd like to thank, first of all, Jolene and Sandra for their introductions and for the opportunity to speak with you. The title of my talk this evening is Forbidden Archaeology, Evidence for Extreme Human Antiquity and the Extraterrestrial Hypothesis. First, I'd like to introduce myself as a researcher in history of science for the Bhaktivedanta Institute. That's the science studies branch of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And my work is inspired by the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. Now, I'm glad that I looked at the LA MUFON website before I came here this evening, because then I learned what I was supposed to talk about. So the topics I'm going to go over this evening are the archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity and how it relates to different ideas connected with UFOs. Then I'm also going to give you a little bit of a preview of my next book, Human Devolution, which will be coming out this fall. And then I learned on the website that I was also supposed to speak about latest developments on reports of a sunken city off the coast of India. And I'll also speak about some other research that I'm doing there. So first of all, what does archaeology have to do with UFOs and aliens? There is a connection. Many in the field have offered theories about alien interventions and the origin of the human race. So I think if we're going to talk about such things, we should know something about what archaeology tells us about a human presence on this planet, so that if we're going to speak about alien interventions and extraterrestrial interventions, we should, be able to connect them with the actual archaeological facts, and not just what we read about in the current textbooks. Now, as I mentioned, my work is inspired by my studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. These writings tell us some very interesting things about the origin of the human race. They tell us, first of all, that human civilizations have been present on this planet for vast periods of cyclical time. The basic unit of this Vedic cyclical time is called the Day of Brahma. It lasts for 4,320,000,000 years. It's followed by a night of Brahma, which also lasts for the same period of time, 4,320,000,000 years. And during the days of Brahma, life, including human life, is manifest in the universe, and during the nights, it's dormant or quiescent. Now, these ancient Sanskrit writings, they also speak of ape men. This idea of ape men isn't something that was invented by European scientists of the mid-19th century. Thousands of years before that, these ancient Sanskrit authors were speaking about such things. But according to them, alongside these ape men were existing humans of our type, and the period of coexistence goes back quite far in time. Actually, it goes back all the way to the beginning of the Day of Brahma. According to the Vedic cosmological calendars, the Day of Brahma began about 2 billion years ago. So, Vedic archaeologists might expect to find evidence for a human presence going back that far, about 2 billion years. Now, these ideas that I've just briefly sketched out for you are, of course, somewhat different than the ideas about human origins that we get from Charles Darwin and his modern followers. Basically, they tell us that life began on this planet somewhere between 2 and 3 billion years ago. Then they say the first apes and monkeys came into existence about 40 million years ago. Then they say the first ape men came into existence about 6 million years ago. And finally, they say that humans of our type came into existence only about 100,000 years ago. And generally, they say that all of the physical evidence supports, this picture of human origins. But when I did 8 years of research into the entire history of archaeology, I found something quite different. I found that over the past 150 years, archaeologists have discovered huge amounts of evidence showing that humans of our type have been present on this planet for this entire period of time. And the evidence takes the form of human skeletal remains, human artifacts, and human footprints. Now, many people will ask, if there is so much evidence of this type, then why don't we hear about it so much? And Sandra and Jolene referred to this process of knowledge filtration, which we see illustrated here. We can call the blue box the knowledge filter, and I'm sure you're very familiar with how this operates in your field, of UFOs and aliens. It represents the fixed ideas that scientists have about certain subjects, in this case human origins. And reports of evidence that conform to these fixed ideas will pass through this social filter very easily, which means these facts will be mentioned in textbooks. Scientists will speak about them at conferences. If you go to museums of natural history, you'll see the objects on display. But if we have reports of evidence that radically contradict these fixed ideas, then they tend to be rejected, which means we don't hear about them, we don't read about them in the textbooks, we don't see the objects in the museums. What I'd like to do now is go over some representative examples of the kinds of evidence that I'm talking about. In 1979, Mary Leakey, one of the most famous archaeologists of the 20th century, discovered dozens of footprints at a place called Laetoli in the country of Tanzania in East Africa. Mary Leakey said that after careful study, she could see that these footprints were absolutely identical to modern human footprints. But the footprints are found in layers of solidified volcanic ash about 4 million years old. Now, a Vedic archaeologist wouldn't be surprised to find evidence that humans of our type were walking around in Africa 4 million years ago. But for the normal type of archaeologist of today, it would seem quite surprising. Now, Mary Leakey did not believe that humans of our type were present in Africa 4 million years ago. So this is how she explained the presence of those footprints. She said, and most archaeologists today would agree with her, that 4 million years ago there must have existed some type of ape man who had feet exactly like ours, and that's how the footprints were made. And that's certainly possible. Unfortunately, there's no physical evidence to support that idea. Scientists have skeletons of the ape men that existed at that time, and their feet are quite different than modern human feet. They're very ape-like. Nobody's ever discovered an ape man who had feet exactly like ours. Now, this topic came up for me in a couple of years ago when I spoke at the World Archaeological Congress in Cape Town, South Africa. Also speaking there was this scientist, Ron Clark from England. He had announced the discovery of a fairly complete skeleton of Australopithecus from a place called Sterkfontein in South Africa. And among the bones were the foot bones of the creature. And from those bones, Clark made this model of the foot, which is quite ape-like, as it should be, because the bones, the foot bones of the creature were quite ape-like. For one thing, the first toe is very long, and it can move out to the side, like a human thumb. Actually, it can move much further out to the side than you see it in this position here. The other toes are also quite long, sort of like short human fingers. So now this creature was about the same age as the footprints found by Mary Leakey. So after Ron Clark spoke, I was in the audience, and I put a question to him. And my question was, why doesn't this foot match the footprints that were found by Mary Leakey? I mean, you see what his problem was. He was advertising he had the oldest human ancestor, but elsewhere in Africa there was evidence that humans of our type were walking around at the exact same time. So how did he answer my question? Ron Clark said, well, it was my ape man who made those footprints found by Mary Leakey, but he was walking with his long first toe pressed up tightly against the other ones, like this, and he was also walking with his other long toes curled under, like this, and that's how the footprints were made. Now, I mean, some of you are laughing a little bit. And in Cape Town, I was also laughing a little bit. And the reason I was laughing is that the 1,000 archaeologists listening to Clark, they weren't laughing. They were just nodding their heads saying, oh, yes, that sounds perfectly reasonable to me. It's another way in which this knowledge filtering process operates. Evidence for extreme human antiquity can be staring scientists right in the face, but they will simply make some mental adjustment to conveniently explain it away. Now this is an anatomically modern skull. It was part of a fairly complete anatomically modern human skeleton. It was found by the Italian geologist Giuseppe Ragazzoni in the late 19th century at a place called Castanedolo in northern Italy. And he found it in layers of rock roughly 4 million years old, the same age as the footprints found by Mary Leakey. Because sometimes people will say, okay, you've got footprints, but what about a skeleton of a human being 4 million years old? Do you have that? And yes, we do have that, and this is part of the evidence. Now, what I like to do in cases like this, I mean, just as you like to investigate UFO reports, I like to investigate things like this. I went with an Italian friend of mine to northern Italy, and we went to the town of Castanedolo, and we tried to relocate the site where this discovery was made. In going through the area, we met at a house near the place where we were searching this gentleman, elderly gentleman, and actually he turned out to know quite a bit about the case. Here I was giving him showing him a copy of the Italian edition of my book, The Hidden History of the Human Race. But he had in his possession some interesting documents. For example, he had this old geological report about the hill at Castanedolo where this particular discovery was made. And there's mention here of Pliocene man. So Pliocene is the geological period that goes back to around 4 million years ago. This report contained a fairly detailed description of the exact place of the discovery, and with the help of this gentleman and this detailed description in this old document, we were able to relocate the site where this discovery was made, and I think it provides an opportunity for further research in this same area. Now, many times when scientists hear about a human skeleton being found in some very ancient layer of rock, they say, look, it's very easy to explain. There's no mystery here whatsoever. What happened is very obvious. Only a few thousand years ago, someone died at this level here, and then his friends dug a grave and put the skeleton down here, and that's why you think you found a human skeleton in a layer of rock 4 million years old. Now things like that can happen, they do happen, but in this particular case, Ragazzoni, the discoverer of the skeleton, was a professional geologist. He was very much aware of this problem, and in his original reports he said if it had been a burial, then all the overlying layers of rock would have been disturbed, as we see here. But he said, I checked very carefully when I was taking the skeleton out of the ground, and I could see that all the overlying layers of rock were perfectly intact and undisturbed. And that means the skeleton really is as old as the layer of rock in which it was found, in this case, 4 million years. Now this is Carlos Ribeiro. He was the chief government geologist of Portugal in the latter part of the 19th century, and he discovered hundreds of human artifacts in his country of Portugal in layers of rock 20 million years old. He displayed these artifacts in the Museum of Geology in Lisbon, and I visited that museum a couple of years ago. But you won't see the objects on display today. He displayed them here in these cases, but today they're kept locked in these cabinets down here where nobody can see them. Now, I did get permission from the director of the museum to study and photograph these objects for a report I gave at the European Association of Archaeologists annual meeting, which was held in Lisbon a couple of years ago. And this is a photograph of one of the artifacts. It's a pointed artifact made of flint, and it has use marks on it. It comes from a place called Morganheira in Portugal. It's interesting what happened with this artifact. As I said, it came from layers of rock 20 million years old. And when Ribeiro was living, it was the objects were displayed in the museum with labels indicating an age of 20 million years. Now, when he died, the next generation of officials in the museum left the objects on display, but they changed the labels. And this is the new label that they wrote for that particular object. The first line says instrument of flint. It comes from Morganheira. It was discovered by Ribeiro. This line gives the age. It says Paleolitico Superior. That means the Upper Paleolithic. And according to archaeologists, the Upper Paleolithic period in Europe goes back about 20,000 years. So it's interesting what they did. They looked at the objects. They said 20 million years, that's impossible. 20,000 years, that sounds about right. So they wrote the new labels for the artifacts. But then the next generation of officials in the museum, they put the whole collection away. And if you went to that museum today, you would not see these objects. You would not even be aware that they were even there. A similar case from Belgium. This is the Belgian geologist Routot. Early in the 20th century, he discovered hundreds of human artifacts at a place called Boncel in Belgium. And using his old maps and documents, I rediscovered the place where he found these. This is an old quarry near Boncel. Belgian archaeologists told me, you're just wasting your time. You'll never find the place. It's probably a parking lot or a supermarket by now. But I did rediscover the place, and he found these artifacts in these bottom layers of this quarry. And these layers down here, according to both Routot and modern geologists, are about 30 million years old. Now, the objects are still in the collection of the Royal Museum of Natural Sciences in Brussels. If you go to that museum, you won't see them. Now, if you'd gone there in the year 1920, you would have seen them on display in the main hall of the museum with ages of 30 million years attached to them. But after Routot died, his colleagues thought, we can't have this. This is impossible. Humans didn't exist 30 million years ago. So they took the collection off the display shelves, and they locked them away in the storage rooms of the Department of Archaeology. Now, I went there about a year and a half ago, and I did get permission from the director of the museum to see and photograph these artifacts for a report I gave at a major international conference on archaeology that was held in Europe. They're still there. If you go there, you won't see them, however. Now, a case from our own state of California. It's always fascinated me, the California gold mine discoveries. Of course, we all know about the California gold rush, and the miners came from around the world to get the gold there. To get it, they dug tunnels into the sides of mountains. This is Table Mountain in Tuolumne County. Deep inside the tunnels, the miners found human skeletons and hundreds of human artifacts in the solid rock. For example, they found many dozens of these mortars and pestles. What makes these discoveries interesting is they're found in layers of solid rock that belong to the early part of the geological period called the Eocene, which means these objects would be about 50 million years old. Now, a Vedic archaeologist wouldn't be surprised by this, but the average archaeologist today would find it quite impossible, because 50 million years ago is before the time of the first apes and monkeys, according to their picture of the history of life on this planet, which may be in need of revision. Now, these discoveries were reported to the scientific world by Dr. J.D. Whitney, who was the chief government geologist of California. He wrote a massive book about them that was published by Harvard University in the year 1880, but we don't hear very much about these discoveries today because of this process of knowledge filtration. And this is the scientist most responsible for the knowledge filtering process in this particular case. This is Dr. William B. Holmes of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. And what he said is this. He said, if Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of human evolution, then he would not have announced those discoveries, despite the imposing array of facts with which he was confronted. In other words, if the facts did not go along with the theory, then the facts had to be put aside, and that's exactly what happened. And Sandra asked me to say a few words about some of the reactions that came when we started trying to get these facts out to the public. As Sandra mentioned, a few years ago I was a consultant for an NBC television special called The Mysterious Origins of Man, hosted by Charlton Heston. And the book was largely based on the material from, the television program was largely based on material from my book, Forbidden Archeology. And during the filming, we tried to get permission to see the artifacts, which are in the collection of the Phoebe Hearst Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley. We were refused permission at that time. And nevertheless, we did go on with the program, but it was interesting to see what happened. When scientists learned that this program was going to be shown on NBC, they tried to get the General Electric Company, which owns NBC, to stop NBC from showing the program. They weren't successful. The program was shown several times. And then it was interesting what happened. The scientists attempted to get the United States government to punish NBC for showing the program. This is a letter from one of them to the FCC, asking the FCC to investigate and censure NBC for having shown this program to the American people. And this wasn't just one isolated letter that one scientist sent in. This was an organized campaign run from the University of California at Berkeley. Scientists all over America and all over the world were invited to send letters of support to the FCC. In support of this. And what they wanted the FCC to do was to force NBC to make primetime apologies for having shown the program, and also they wanted NBC to be fined millions of dollars so that they would never do anything like this again. Now, I'm happy to say that the FCC didn't do that, but it may be a fact that because of attempts like this, the networks may have been a little bit intimidated. So we'll see what they'll do in the future regarding getting more of this information out to the public. Now, it's interesting. Recently, I reapproached the officials at the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley. And this time, I went to them because I wanted to present a paper on these discoveries at the next World Archaeological Congress, which is being held in Washington, D.C. in June. And actually, I'm one of the co-organizers of a section on history of archaeology for that conference, which is one of the major international gatherings of professional archaeologists. So on the strength of that, they did allow me to go into the storerooms of the museum and photograph and study the artifacts, finally. And this is a picture of me in the museum there, storerooms. And these are some of those very same 50-million-year-old artifacts from the California gold mines, which are not displayed to the public, but with some persistence, I was able to get in there and see them. And then also from some of the old maps and documents, I decided I want to try to relocate some of the gold mines that these objects came from. So this is Table Mountain in Tuolumne County as it exists today. I showed you the diagram there. So trying to find these gold mines was like looking for needles in haystacks, but somehow or other with my team of assistants, this is on the left there, Lori, who's back there at the table, and another one of my assistants is a graduate student in archaeology. Using the old maps and documents, we actually were able to find, now I can't tell you exactly where this is, but we were able to locate some of the old mining tunnels where these objects were found, and it's going to be the subject of some further research. Now, I mean, how far back in time does this evidence really go? Well, one thing I'd like to point out is all the discoveries I've mentioned to you up to this point are discoveries that were made by professional scientists and reported in the professional scientific literature. But, I mean, just as in the case of UFOs, it's not just that scientists see these things or find these things. Ordinary people also make discoveries, and their reports, although you might not find them in the pages of the scientific literature, they might make their way into other literature, such as ordinary newspapers. So this is a report from the Morrisonville Times, from Morrisonville, Illinois, the year 1892. It tells of a gold chain that was found solidly embedded in a piece of coal. This piece of coal was being put by a woman named Mrs. Culp into a coal-burning stove. The piece of coal was very big, it broke in half, and inside, she found the gold chain. Now, from this report, we could tell what mine that the coal came from, and we got in touch with geologists from the state of Illinois, and they told us that the coal from this mine is 300 million years old. Now, going back to the scientific literature, in the year 1862, a scientific journal called The Geologist published a report that a complete anatomically modern human skeleton was found about 90 feet below the surface of the ground in Macoupin County, Illinois. And directly above the skeleton was a thick layer of slate rock that extended for dozens of yards in all directions, completely sealing the skeleton off from the surface. And geologists told us that the layers here, where the skeleton was found, were again about 300 million years old, the same age as the gold chain found in the same state. This interesting report from Scientific American tells of a beautiful metallic vase that was found solidly embedded in rock that is about 600 million years old. And finally, the oldest objects that I encountered in the research that I did were round metallic spheres that have been found over the past 30 years or so by miners in South Africa. They come from a mine near a place called Ottosdalen in the western Transvaal region. The objects, they're not huge like this. They're 1 or 2 inches in diameter. They are made, at least the one that was analyzed by metallurgists before we filmed the Mysterious Origins of Man television show, turned out to be made of a naturally occurring iron ore called hematite. Hematite is used by different tribal peoples in Africa even today as a semi-precious stone. They make jewelry and other types of objects out of it. What's interesting about these objects are the parallel grooves that go around the equator of each object. This one has 3 parallel grooves, exactly parallel. Some of them have 4, some have 3, some have 2. I gave one of these objects to researchers from New England MUFON, New Hampshire MUFON. They had some engineers there who were interested. And they sliced one in half, and the engineer who was studying them measured from the center out to the edge, the radius. He said the radius, he said, varied only by 1/4000th of an inch, all the way around. So he considered it to be very finely machined, a very finely machined object to a tolerance that's very difficult even for manufacturers today to reach. But what's interesting about these objects is they're found solidly embedded in mineral deposits over 2 billion years old. And the metallurgists who did examine them say they could see no way in which they could have formed naturally in the layers of the earth, and therefore they had to have been manufactured by someone with human-like intelligence. So generally, as I said, we're told that all the physical evidence supports this idea that humans of our type came into existence only about 100,000 years ago. But I think that's not true. I've only given you a tiny sample of the evidence for extreme human antiquity that's documented in forbidden archaeology. But I can assure you that there are massive amounts of evidence showing that humans of our type have been present throughout this entire period of time. And I think if we want to theorize about how extraterrestrial interventions may have influenced the presence and development of the human species on this planet, we have to take this evidence into account. Now, what I'd like to do now is move on to the second of this evening's topics. I was asked to give a little preview of what's coming in my book, Human Devolution, which will be out this fall. This is the cover of it. It's the book is going into production, but it won't be available for sale until later this year. It's called Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory, and it includes quite a bit of information that comes from the UFO field, because I think that's part of the story. Basically, the evidence in forbidden archaeology shows that humans of our type have coexisted with various types of apes and monkeys and ape men on this planet, but that evidence doesn't tell us anything about where we originally came from or how we came to be. So I propose, however, that before we ask the question, where did human beings come from, we should first of all ask the question, what is a human being? And most scientists today will say that a human being is simply a combination of the ordinary physical elements, like iron, calcium, phosphorus. But I am going to propose that it's more reasonable to start with the assumption that a human being is composed of three things: ordinary matter, and mind, and consciousness, or spirit, each existing as separate elements. Now, the ordinary matter we really don't have to talk about, but what about this mind element? I'm going to define mind as a subtle material energy associated with the human organism that can act on ordinary matter in ways that we can't explain by our current laws of physics. And this is something you encounter in the alien abduction literature and reports, and also in some of the UFO reports. Just like wind is a subtle thing. You can't see it, but you can observe its actions as it moves over water, making waves. Now, is there any scientific evidence for the existence of this mind element or this consciousness element as well? And there is, but again, there's been a tremendous amount of knowledge filtering going on in this particular field. And I'll just mention a few things. this evening in this preview. Some of the evidence for this mind element comes from a very interesting person. This is Alfred Russel Wallace, a famous English biologist. Actually, he was the co-founder with Darwin of the theory of evolution by natural selection. But he was also involved in psychical research. Now, in most biology textbooks, you'll read about his contributions to the theory of evolution, but you won't read anything about his experiments in the paranormal. Actually, Darwin was quite upset with him. He said, by researching into these paranormal topics, you're murdering our joint child, the theory of evolution. So Charles Darwin was very unhappy with Wallace. But Wallace was joined in his psychical research by another English scientist, Sir William Crookes, who received a Nobel Prize in physics, and he was also president of the Royal Society, which still is England's premier scientific organization. They were investigating mediums. One of the mediums they investigated was Daniel Dunglass Hume. And he could do some interesting things. Like, he could take an accordion, and he would hold it with one hand here, and the keys would be here, and just holding it with one hand, he could make this play elaborate tunes. It was really inexplicable. Of course, being good experimental scientists, Wallace and Crookes thought, well, what could possibly be going on here? The first consideration was, well, he's got a trick accordion. So they bought a brand new accordion and used that in their experiments. Then they thought, well, somehow or other, by some sleight of hand, he could be getting his other hand down there on the keys. So they constructed a cage so that he would have to hold the accordion like this. The keys are down here. And then they made this experimental setup. And they said that under these circumstances, he could still cause the accordion to play elaborate tunes. And then beyond that, both Wallace and Crookes said that on several occasions they saw Hume remove his hand completely from the cage, and they saw the accordion floating in the middle of the cage, playing elaborate tunes all by itself. Now, you have to wonder, why would this Nobel Prize physicist and the co-founder of the theory of evolution write about these things? Did they have some kind of psychological death wish, that they wanted all of their colleagues to think they'd gone completely insane and ruined their careers? I don't think so. I think they wrote about these things because they actually observed them, and they wanted their colleagues and the public to know about them. They also, on several occasions, saw Hume levitate. And these levitations were not done on a stage where you could have elaborate apparatus as magicians do today. They occurred in the drawing rooms and of ordinary English people, and he would just, right in the middle of a group of people, just rise into the air in a home where he'd never been before, where there was no opportunity for him to prepare any type of elaborate apparatus. And both Wallace and Crookes testified to this in writing several times. Another example, Marie and Pierre Curie. Every physics student learns about them. They got Nobel Prizes for their work in discovering radium. You read about that in every textbook. What you don't read about in the textbooks is that they were heavily involved in psychical research. They were part of a group of about 20 prominent European scientists who were working in Paris early in the 20th century. The group included about 5 Nobel Prize winners, and they were conducting extensive research into paranormal phenomena. They were examining in particular the Italian medium Eusapia Palladino. And on one occasion, just to give you an example, the medium was sitting in a chair Marie Curie was controlling her hands, other scientists were controlling her feet, and this occurred in broad daylight in a laboratory in the Psychological Research Institute in Paris. And Pierre Curie, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, said that a large table like this was floating in the air in the middle of the room in broad daylight with nothing touching it. So all the scientists signed documents saying that these things were true. Pierre Curie's research notes are still there in the scientific archives in Paris, and he wrote numerous letters to his prominent physicist friends saying these things are absolutely true and they have to be taken into account. Now I could go on and on about this, but what does it mean? To me, it means there's a mind element associated with the human organism that can act on ordinary matter in ways that we can't explain by our current laws of physics. Then, what about this consciousness element? Is there any scientific evidence for that? And I believe there is in the form, well, one area it comes from is medical and psychiatric reports of out-of-body experiences where the conscious self appears to separate from the body. Michael Sabum, an American cardiologist, wrote an extensive report about these happenings, and he asked himself a question at the end of his book, which is called Recollections of Death, a Medical Investigation. He says, is this conscious self that appears to separate from the brain during these moments of extreme crisis, could that be the soul that the great religions of the world have always talked about? Now, he didn't answer the question, but I believe, and I believe he believed, that the answer to that question was yes. So, what does this mean? It means to me that, well, probably our whole universe, our whole cosmos is structured according to levels of ordinary matter, subtle mind, and pure consciousness or spirit. And that means, if we want to explain, human origins, if we want to explain human origins, we have to do more than just try to explain how the chemicals came together. We have to try to explain how consciousness, mind, and matter came together in the human form. And mostly, these days, people, they seem to want very simple explanations. Either they want a very simple creation account where God just immediately creates everything, or they want some simple evolutionary account where chemicals combine in the Earth's early ocean and then they turn into human beings, or they want some very simple extraterrestrial intervention type of account. But I think the actual story is going to be much more complicated. I think it's going to involve all of these things, and that's what I'm proposing in Human Devolution. I'm proposing that, yes, some guiding cosmic intelligence is involved in the process of human origins, but there is also an evolutionary process going on in the cosmos. By evolution, we mean reproduction with modification. Things reproduce, living organisms, they reproduce, and in the course of that reproduction, there are changes. But what I would propose is that, yes, there is a reproductive process going on. And I think you get into this in some of your alien abduction reports about strange variations of the reproductive process. So what I'm going to suggest is that there is a reproductive process going on in the cosmos by which higher beings, through a process of what we might call controlled breeding or guided genetic engineering, are, through their reproductive processes, generating the forms of the living organisms that we see on our planet, including the human organism. So, but it's the opposite of the Darwinian evolutionary concept, which is why I call it devolution. The Darwinian process starts with the most simple things and then builds up to the more complex, whereas I'm proposing that we start from the more complex things, and by their reproductive processes, they generate, you could say, the simpler ones. And in that process of reproduction, it goes from more subtle elements to denser elements. There's a lot that could be said about that, but I think that's... And then also, there is an extraterrestrial element to it as well, because it's a process that's not only happening on our Earth, but it's going on throughout the cosmos. The ancient Sanskrit writings do speak of such things. They do speak of people on this planet who are the product of reproductive processes involving beings from other planets or other dimensions of the universe. And of course, the ancient Sanskrit writings, as many of you are aware, speak of vimanas, of various types of spacecraft that travel from planet to planet on our dimension, and then there are also extra-dimensional craft that can travel between different dimensions. And there are forms of life adapted to all of these planets and all of these dimensions, and our human organisms on this planet are connected with all of these different dimensions and different organisms on other planets. So the actual picture of human origins may be much more complicated than any simple creation account or any simple evolution account or any extraterrestrial account that we're now familiar with. So that's a little preview of my next book, Human Devolution. And I think this human devolution concept in connection with this archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity has the characteristic of a good scientific explanation, because a good scientific explanation should naturally accommodate the facts that are out there in the world without artificially manipulating the data set. To keep their ideas about human origins intact, today's scientists have to ignore all of this evidence for extreme human antiquity that actually is there in the museums, that scientists have actually discovered. They also have to ignore all of this evidence for the UFO and alien phenomenon. They have to ignore all of this scientific evidence for the existence of mind and consciousness as separately existing elements. They have to ignore all the knowledge that's accumulated in the great wisdom traditions of the world. Who's dealing with reality? I think they're excluding vast categories of evidence from the real world out there to maintain their particular theories. So now, the third topic that I was asked to talk about was mentioned on the LA MUFON website that I would talk about evidence for a sunken city off the coast of India. So it is a fact that actually not last year, but about a year and a half ago, Indian oceanographers discovered remains of a sunken city in the Gulf of Cambay, which is here off the coast of the Indian state of Gujarat, in this part here. Actually, last year I attended a meeting in Hyderabad where the Indian government's Minister of Science was present, and we had an opportunity to discuss this discovery. I was there, and Minister Joshi was also there. And the discoveries were made by this team of oceanographers who work for Mr. Joshi's department in the National Institute of Ocean Studies. And what they were doing is they were doing side scan sonar mapping of the sea bottom off the coast of Gujarat. And in their sonar images, they found what appeared to be archaeological structures of buildings going along the bank of an ancient river channel that's now under the ocean. And that's one of the side scan sonar images. This is another one of the side scan sonar images of apparent structures, below, deep below the sea there. And when this was first reported, some scientists were very skeptical. They said, well, perhaps these things aren't humans, these aren't human structures at all. Now, to test that, this is what they thought the settlements would have looked like when they were above water. But to test this, you can see the water is very turbulent, it's very dark. They were not able to send divers down there to do a visual inspection. They were able to do the sonar scans, but to sort of determine what was down there, they did some dredging. And this is the dredge that they were putting down. And what they came up with was pretty interesting. They came up with semi-precious stones that were drilled with holes for beads. They also came up with human bones. This is a human vertebrae, and this is part of a human jawbone that came up from the dredging. And this was a stone with some engravings on it. And they also found a piece of wood. They dredged up a piece of wood that gave a carbon date of 9,500 years. And that would make that the oldest city in the world. This is the Gulf of Cambrai city, and at 7,500 years BC, that would make it older than any of the other urban civilizations that are known, including the Egyptian, the Anatolian, the Sumerian, the Indus Valley civilization, and the early Chinese civilization. So it's really an interesting discovery. It's quite controversial. There's a lot of debate going on about it now. To do any further research it's going to have to be some kind of multi-million-dollar project with these submersibles going down there and trying to, and up to this point it hasn't been organized yet. So we'll see what further developments come from that. But there are other projects that I'm personally working on. They don't cost millions of dollars, so I'm able to do them myself. But they're interesting, even from the standpoint of the idea of extraterrestrials. This is the temple complex of Sri Rangam in southern India. That temple complex is the largest temple complex in India. It's located down here in the Tamil Nadu state. The temple complex has there's the central temple, and then there's 7 walls going around the central temple complex. The temple complex is on an island in the Kaveri River that goes through there. The idol in the temple, the deity form that's in the temple, is a reclining form of Vishnu lying on a bed of serpents. And according to the traditional accounts, this is a very interesting idol. It's said it was originally worshipped on another planet called Brahmaloka. And then, millions of years ago, it was brought to Earth. And it was worshipped in a city called Ayodhya in northern India. And then it was transferred by a vimana, by a spacecraft, from northern India to southern India. And the spacecraft, the vimana, landed on that island in the Kaveri River. Now, it was supposed to go further, but there was a condition attached to the transport of this idol that if it stopped anywhere, it would just stay there and it couldn't be moved. So when it landed on that island in that river, it had to stay there, and therefore a temple was built there millions of years ago. Then over the course of time, that temple was lost. It was covered over, by jungle and sand and things like that, until about somewhere between 10,000 and 5,000 years ago, it was rediscovered and another temple was built there. So it's an interesting history. And this is, see this gold structure here? The form of the idol is in the building below. It's directly below this. And this structure here, which you find in all Indian temples, above, in the place above, on the building, above where the idol is, the deity is, they have something, it's called a vimana, interestingly enough, which is the word for spacecraft. Now the most recent structures in the temple are said by traditional sources to be about 5,000 years old. And that's interesting because according to current historians, there should have been no Vedic culture present in India 5,000 years ago. Certainly no complex temple structures like that. So I'm a little interested in this particular place, and I'm interested in trying to show that it's at least 5,000 years old. And what to speak of, this whole history of that idol coming from other planets by spacecraft. I mean, that's another whole area. But what I would like to show to archaeologists and historians is that place is at least 5,000 years old. And there are some documents that say that this is the third wall, the third boundary wall of the temple. There are 7 boundary walls. This, according to some ancient documents, is about 5,000 years old. Now, I went to this place with an Indian archaeologist who's promised to be helpful. And our first effort is just to see if there's any place where we could do some excavations. Obviously, we couldn't do it somewhere like this because it's open to the public and it's just too much built up. But we did find some places along the boundary wall where we possibly could do some excavations. This is the Indian archaeologist who's helping me get the proper permissions from the temple authorities and the Archaeological Survey of India to do this research. But we were mainly just looking for places where we could do this, and we did find some open places where we could do that research. And if the proper permissions are obtained, then I would go back there in December to do that research. So those are my 3 topics. The evidence for extreme human antiquity and the extraterrestrial hypothesis, a little preview of my book, Human Devolution, and a little report on the Sunken City and some other work that I'm doing in India. So thank you very much for coming here this evening.
Thank you so much, Michael. Just trying to cover millions and millions of years of information in just an hour and a half, and you did a great job. Folks, I know he's here now, and we want to ask him a few questions. So what we'd like to ask you to do is come up where the video camera is. We have a microphone set up there. And just go ahead and line up, one question at a time, please. Please phrase it in the form of a question, as we'll have points deducted from your score. Don't be shy. Come on down. Hi. How you doing? Great. Thanks.
Okay.
Concerning San Pedro Man, are you familiar with that one up in Wyoming or wherever it was?
You'll have to tell me a little bit more about it.
It was the little 3-foot mummy that was found while a couple people were gold mining up in Wyoming or somewhere, and they blasted away some rock, and then they found there was a cavern in there, and there was like a 2 or 3 foot mummy on the shelf in there.
I learned something new every day, and particularly I learn things when I come to speak before groups like this. So no, that is something new for me. I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, okay, then actually I won't be able to ask the question.
Well, but go ahead and ask the question.
Yeah, well, it concerned because I just wrote a paper that I posted on the internet about this, and somebody had sent me some documentation about mummification rituals and how they had shrunken, like in modern days, in the last couple hundred years, that they had shrunken beings. I guess there's a way that you could mummify something that it would shrink. And I was just wondering if you had any information or any correlation between any of the other stuff.
Well, see, one thing is interesting is that you do find, if you go through the literature, I wasn't familiar with this particular case, but you do find evidence for extremely large and extremely small size humans, that have existed on this planet. So I think that's interesting. As far as mummification techniques go, I mean, obviously, if you're mummifying something, it's going to shrivel and shrink, but I think there's a limit to what you could do to the bone structure. I mean, that would be the thought that I would have, that, yeah, the fleshy parts are obviously going to shrink up. Whether they could, by mummification techniques, cause, the bones to shrink, I'm not so sure.
Yeah,
about
okay.
that.
Well, thank you. I'll email you a couple pictures, because I have a couple pictures that they're like 2 feet. These are modern-day mummies that have been modified, and they're 2 or 3 feet.
I would love to have that. I think I've got a card over there on my table. It's got my email address on it. I'd like to hear that, get that report from you.
Good evening. Given that there's evidence for human beings millions and millions of years ago, is time travel a possible explanation for at least some of those observations?
What I've done in Forbidden Archaeology is simply put the facts out there, and I'm happy to have people try to account for this evidence in any way that makes sense to them. Different attempts have been made to explain the evidence. Time travel, by which I think you mean reverse time travel, is an idea that has been brought up. Extraterrestrial visitations are another idea that's been brought up. I tend to favor the idea that they are humans that existed at that time. The Vedic literature does give some information about time travel, but not reverse time travel. The Vedic literature speaks about relativistic time effects, say where a being living on this planet will go to one of the higher dimensional planets and apparently stay there only for a few minutes and then come back to Earth and find that millions of years have passed. So you could say that that's sort of a kind of time travel, where you go to one dimension, you come back, and you've skipped over millions of years and you're still in your same body. So I think that sort of thing is possible. Whether reverse time travel like that is possible, it may be. From different Vedic sages and different accounts, we learn about a human ability called Trikalagya. It means the ability to know past, present, and future instantaneously, so that it may be possible to get information from different points in time, either past, present, or future, by some sorts of means that we're not able to do now. Whether it's possible to physically transport oneself back in time, that's something. I mean, there are different theorists who are proposing that it may or may not be possible through wormholes or black holes or things like that. I think it's among the modern cosmologists and astrophysicists, it's a matter of debate. Some of them would say you just get torn up. Anything that would go through a black hole or a wormhole would just get torn up. Others say it may be possible. So what's your opinion?
I don't know. I'm just trying to keep an open mind right now, and just fascinated that there's the information to work with. Thank you.
Do you know anything about the sunken complex of temples that's sunken off the southeast coast of India near Mahalapalapuram?
Yes. There's work going on there. Graham Hancock has gone there and done some diving there. There's also, I believe, just a team of regular archaeologists that's been out there. I think the big question will be the age of those remains. If they can be shown to be 5,000 years old or older, that would be quite revolutionary for the whole picture of the origin of civilization in India. If they turn out to be 10,000 years old, that would be quite revolutionary for the whole current picture of civilization anywhere in the world. And if they turn out to be even older than that, then that would be quite interesting for me. So, yes.
Hi. Given this interesting information you gave tonight about mind and spirit, I wonder if you had ever considered, if you ever had, put any of these objects in the hands of gifted psychometrists without telling them the background of any of them and seeing if they can get a feel for the manufacturers or users of them, that they might visualize the actual people who originally constructed them or used them.
There's one standing right behind you, Sandra Marsh. I think you remember at the conference in Nevada. Where was that at? Laughlin UFO.
Yes.
We had one of the metallic spheres from South Africa, which you were holding and getting some impression from. So I don't know if you recall what your impressions were at that time, but
I was just happy to be holding something that was over 2 billion years old.
Yes. So no, that I would love to have someone do some things like that. I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah, that was a while ago. What I'm going to ask you is in regard to a conversation we had a while ago. We haven't really spoken because you've been really busy traveling. This is about the block wall found in Oklahoma, and we had discussed possibly you being able to get some sort of funding to go down into that. I believe it's a coal mine. And could you tell people a little bit about that story, and has anything come of that? Any funding, any further research?
I have not been able to take that any further. See, I've got things that I am trying to take further, and there's more than one person can do, so feel free, anyone, to take up these projects. But the reports were from miners in Heavener, Oklahoma, who went down 2 miles deep in a coal mine, and they were using dynamite to blast open what they call rooms in the mines, and then they would take out the coal. So they dynamited one room, and the miners saw at one end what appeared to be a wall, and it was made of blocks of polished stone, they said, about 6 inches square. And they said the surface of the stone was polished so finely that it was almost like a mirror. They could see reflections in it. They said, the miners said that when they reported this to the mining officials, they were taken out of the mines and sent somewhere else. And unfortunately, I myself have not been able to look into that case, any further. As you see, I do try to follow up on some of these cases, but on that particular one, I haven't been able to do anything more about it. I do think that coal miners are a source of a lot of information about these things. As I said, it's not only just scientists that are finding things. Ordinary people find them. Unfortunately, like a lot of the work that's being done in mining these days is being done with huge machines that just grind everything up. There's not as much hands-on sort of work being done in the mines in this country anymore, but in other countries, miners still are kind of working in a hands-on fashion. So no, Sandra, I have not been able to make any further progress on that particular case.
Well, thank you for everything that you have done. It's been incredible. But now, how old was that layer, though, that the block walls were found?
That comes from the Carboniferous period. That would be in the range of roughly 300 million years. Yes.
Have you thought about other planets that are more hospitable to what you might call human growth and reproduction than this planet?
Yes. As I said, I think there is an extraterrestrial element to the whole process. Many researchers in these fields are, inspired by, writings of various ancient civilizations, whether they're the Sumerian text or the Egyptian text or Mayan text. I'm familiar with a lot of them. I focus myself on the Vedic text, the Sanskrit text, which do speak about 400,000 human species scattered throughout the universe on various planets. So I think we only represent a tiny portion here of the actual human population of the universe.
Last question. Given that some of these people, as you mentioned earlier, could levitate, predict the future, whatever psycho powers they have, and your new devolution theory, why would the upper ranks bother to give folks here on Earth those powers?
Why would they bother to give those powers?
Yeah, and so rarely at that.
It appears that things go in cycles, because it would appear that in previous ages, people on this planet had more of these powers than we do today. As a matter of fact, it appears that what we are attempting to do today is reproduce these powers through technical means. In other words, people may have had extrasensory perception, abilities to perceive things naturally at a distance in more ancient times. If you look at records of various ancient civilizations, it seems to have been quite a common thing. Now today we rely on CNN, the World Wide Web, television, satellites. I think that's simply an attempt to reproduce the same. I mean, why do we even try to do those things? I think it's because it's a natural ability that we once had, and we're trying to reproduce it through technical means today. And why that is, I really can't say why at times we are given access to those types of powers and why at a particular time we're not. The Vedic literature speaks of a cycle of ages that repeats. That there's a golden age where most people have these powers, and then it's reduced by 25%, another 25%, and now we're in a fourth age. And then the cycle will go on again, just as in the year, we find there's spring, summer, fall, winter. Why is it like that? It's just the way nature is. So it just appears to be a natural phenomenon that these powers are sometimes given and sometimes taken away, as far as I can tell.
Yes. Say when you find say a human boot in an geological layer that supposedly would have belonged to the age of the dinosaurs, and then you've got the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid that were obviously built before there was recorded history, how can you state that a linear timeline applies in both cases? In other words, where you've got a crisscross of timelines on this planet, and you've got time travelers, and you've got interdimensional shifts. So have you been able to draw any conclusions in that direction as to explain this mystery?
Well, what we said in Forbidden Archaeology is that our whole picture of time and everything may be in need of revision. But yeah, I was addressing my work principally to today's scientists who do accept a particular like geological history of the Earth and a particular concept of time. So my idea was that if I was going to engage in some kind of dialogue with them, there had to be some kind of framework for the discussion. So what I chose to do is accept their framework and their sense of time, and then point out to them the anomalies that would appear to call these things into question. Now that may not be the only way to approach these things. You could start by challenging the assumptions about time and the whole geological history of the Earth, and constructing a whole worldview in which these anomalies aren't anomalies, but they're part of the reality of things. It's just that I chose to go about it in that particular way, which is why you could say I structure my presentations like that. But in Forbidden Archaeology, we do say that, yeah, really, the whole picture of time may be in need of revision. But, for the sake of discussion, with, mainstream scientists, I've chosen to go about it in that way.
So there's a book by Peter Moon and Preston Nichols called Montauk Revisited, which stems, of course, from the Philadelphia experiment, which supposedly resulted in time travel. And the promo for this book on the back cover, it says, "Go beyond science. Discover the occult principles behind the creation of this time zone." So when you find a human boot in a supposed geological layer that belonged to the dinosaur age, that's definitely beyond human science, and you're into the occult.
I do believe that we go, I think in any field, whether we're talking about archaeology or UFO studies or physics, if you pursue it to its limits, you do start coming into the realm of what you have characterized as the occult.
Okay, thank you.
But it's step by step. Maybe you've taken some big steps beyond, but I'm kind of interested in bringing people who may not be able to take those big steps, step by step in that direction, because I think you're right. In all these fields, if you really look at what's there, you are led in that direction.
Okay.
Thanks.
Those metallic spheres look like bullets to me. I mean, they're very accurately made, so they'd have to be able to go through the bore of a gun. The grooves on the modern high-powered rounds are where your shell casings crimp down on a bullet, so I think those are bullets. Are you familiar with the Death Valley caves they found in the late 40s? It used to be an inland sea thousands of years ago, and they found like 9-foot, 10-foot gold mummies, a lot of gold, and they were sending them off to the Smithsonian, and then when they got there, the boxcars were empty. They'd been removed along the way. And it seems that the common denominator on this planet for these ancient sites is gold mining. Your gold mines, these ancient gold mines in South Africa, the oldest mines on Earth before there was even, copper. So it's like these gold mines seem like the common denominator.
Yes, and there's also gold mines in the Pacific, like in New Guinea and places like that as well. Yeah.
In light of this evidence, what, if any, of Darwin's theory is still relevant?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, the essential idea of reproduction with modification, that's what his theory was based on. But I just think he had it turned upside down. He wanted to start with the simple chemical elements combining, forming some self-reproducing system, which then through reproduction becomes more and more complex and produces as a byproduct or an epiphenomenon mind and consciousness. So I sort of turned the whole thing upside down, starting with consciousness as not an epiphenomenon but a phenomenon, and mind. And because certain consciousnesses and minds need to be accommodated in forms on the gross physical level of reality, there's a generation of forms for them, but beginning from the more complex and subtle ones, going down to the grosser ones, but still there's a process of reproduction and modification that goes on. So I think what remains for me is the essential idea of reproduction and modification, but it isn't random, it's intelligently guided. That's what would remain for me.
It's basically the same principle applies, but his explanation of it's a little different?
Yeah.
So is there a progression from ape man to Homo sapien, or do you think that that's maybe possibly an incorrect conclusion that he...
Again, I think we start out with the more complex forms, then go down to the more simple ones. It would be it's like turning the process upside down, you could say. So no, I wouldn't see a progression from apes to ape men to human beings. Rather, I would see that those are forms that were generated by higher beings for beings existing on this level of reality. So.
Unfortunately, that's all we're going to have time for tonight. Folks, if you want to ask Michael some more questions, I'm going to send him back over to sign books, hint, hint, and then we're going to go over into the little cafe that I spoke so lovingly of earlier and have tea and coffee and schmooze with Michael some more. So I'm going to ask you to give him a big round of applause. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.